Great empires almost always smell the same. They exude the heavy scent of red-hot iron, acrid coal dust, spilled blood, and human sweat. It was precisely in this way that unshakable dynasties of steel, transcontinental railroads, and black oil were built. But the empire whose secret chambers we enter today smelled entirely different. It was fragrant with frightening sterility, boiled animal fat, and aggressive alkali. This was an industrial monopoly built on foam, water, and cleanliness. A corporation selling the whole world a shiny illusion that any historical or physical dirt could simply be washed away. Look closely at this astonishing, eye-stinging contrast. In the mid-19th century, Procter & Gamble factories in Cincinnati resembled grim sets for Dante's Inferno. In gigantic, continuously boiling industrial vats, day and night, thousands of tons of pork and beef lard were cooked, turning into millions of absolutely identical, faceless, stamped bars of soap. Thick factory smog blanketed the sky over the city like a dense shroud, while legions of soot-smeared workers toiled to exhaustion just so that developing America could finally wash its hands. And it is right here, at the rough juncture of deafening conveyor clatter, slaughterhouse stench, and acrid smoke, that the greatest aesthetic paradox of our history is born. This endless, murky river of penny soap, scrubbing ingrained dirt from the weary faces of factory poor, mysteriously transformed into something entirely different. It alchemically crystallized into the purest, absolute, unattainable by mere mortals elite architecture, carefully hidden from prying eyes on the other end of the American continent. A logical, philosophical question arises, which invisibly shadows every powerful dynasty. What exactly do people buy when their personal money paradoxically becomes more than the physical time allotted to them? Why do those whose bank accounts have already ensured a worry-free existence for their unborn great-great-grandchildren continue obsessively to build castles? The answer lies not at all in the primitive need for shelter from bad weather. The answer always lies in the vulnerable human ego, in the desperate, almost tragic attempt to buy immortality by converting one's fluid, dissolvable capital into a frozen form and eternal wood. David Berry Gamble, the direct heir to this colossal soap fortune, perfectly understood this harsh truth. He grew up in the dense shadow of his father's conveyor, in a pragmatic world where absolute value belonged only to gigantic volumes, endless print runs, and the speed of conveyor production. We can only speculate about what he thought at night, listening to the steady, soulless hum of the family factory. But one specific, deeply personal detail reveals his true psychological portrait. David was a man who frantically sought genuine authenticity in a world that his own family had made frighteningly standardized. He physically hated factory symmetry and the cold perfection of machine stamping. Historical chronicles testify that he experienced almost physical pleasure from touching the texture of raw wood. He could run his fingers for long periods over wooden joints, as if trying to feel in their natural roughness that real, living energy which the merciless machine tool on his factories ruthlessly killed. His well-groomed hands, never in his life knowing the ingrained factory soot, demanded tactile contact with true, handcrafted human craftsmanship. Soap is inherently infinitely ephemeral by nature. It dissolves in warm water, turns into dirty foam, and irretrievably flows into the dark sewer of history, leaving behind nothing but a brief, fleeting sense of freshness. The life cycle of the product that made the Gamble dynasty unofficial kings of America lasted mere days. And herein lies the deepest irony. The man who sold the masses something that inevitably disappears desired to create for himself a personal space that even time could not wash away. You stand above time and see this picture in full. You see how murky fat boils in the vats of the 19th century, and simultaneously see how soft sunlight falls on the perfect wooden beams of the secret mansion. A viewer accustomed to the vulgar, ostentatious luxury of nouveau riche, to gold stucco and screaming marble columns, will be completely bewildered upon first encountering this facade. There is no cheap shine here. Here reigns a deep, frightening, dignity-overwhelming silence. We stand on the threshold of history, where industrial millions turn into a complex psychological manifesto. We will explore not just suites of rooms and dark corridors. We will dissect this architecture as the highest form of spatial psychotherapy for the super-rich. Because the secret Gamble Mansion is not just a building for wintering. This is a carefully masked, carved in the rarest woods, confession of a man who sold the world disposable stamping, but for himself demanded absolute eternity. And to understand how exactly cheap animal fat could pay for the most exquisite interiors of the early 20th century, we will have to descend to the very origins of this empire of cleanliness, to those times when the very concept of hygiene was only beginning to convert into boundless social power. To fully appreciate the scale of David Gamble's architectural triumph, we must descend into the deep, soot-scented basements of the 19th century. The history of this commodity empire began in 1837 in the bustling and dirty city of Cincinnati, Ohio. English candlemaker William Procter and Irish soap-maker James Gamble, by fate marrying two native sisters, received wise advice from their perceptive father-in-law to combine modest efforts. They created the joint venture Procter and Gamble, not even suspecting that they were laying the foundation of a global monopoly. At that time, the city bore an unofficial but very accurate nickname of Hogopolis, representing a gigantic, continuously operating slaughterhouse on the banks of the Ohio River. It was precisely cheap animal fat, an unappealing byproduct of the mass meat industry, that became that very hidden golden stream from which future colossal capitals grew. Selling cleanliness in an era of deaf industrial dirt is not just a successful commercial move. This is a sophisticated social mission, masterfully turned into a ruthless monopoly. The second half of the 19th century was choking from factory chimney soot, epidemics, and monstrous unsanitary conditions of overcrowded worker quarters. Soap was not a luxury item or cosmetic. It was a basic means of survival. And when, in 1879, the company released its legendary ivory soap onto the market, it was selling not just a piece of white alkali, it was selling literal salvation. Thanks to a technological accident in production, this soap did not sink in water, which instantly became a brilliant advertising myth. The declared by the creators chemical purity of 99.44% became the new American religion. The Gambles supplied the weary masses with indulgences from dirt. Each package bought for a few cents brought the corporation uninterrupted, stable income, which, imperceptibly, in a foamy stream, turned into a roaring financial waterfall. Capital amassed on cheap mass consumption always carries a bitter psychological aftertaste. When billions of worn copper coins add up to tens of millions of full-weight dollars, this money demands immediate legitimization. David Barry Gamble, representing the second generation of the dynasty, acutely realized this harsh social necessity. By the beginning of the 20th century, he took over management not so much of the factory shops as of the very public image of his family. His main life strategy became methodical, almost obsessive distancing. He began, step by step, to lead his family out of the suffocating industrial stench of Cincinnati, converting the river-like flow of soap dividends into status, elite education, and, most importantly, impeccable, inaccessible to the crowd, taste. But on this path, the dynasty encountered the cruel and arrogant world of old money. On the east coast of America, hereditary capitalist aristocrats reigned supreme, whose fortunes had already acquired a noble historical patina. For them, the Procters and Gambles forever remained provincial upstarts, traders in lard and ash, whose bottomless bank account still bore the invisible stigma of the city slaughterhouse. In high society of that time, it was considered absolute bad form to remind of the physical source of one's wealth. And David Gamble faced the most complex challenge. He needed to prove his right to greatness, but avoid thereby the vulgar demonstration of gold leaf and stucco, which would only confirm the pitiful status of a tasteless nouveau riche. The mansion he conceived to build for his family was to become a crushing response to the arrogant aristocracy. Copied foreign greatness always betrays deep inner insecurity. Therefore, David did not need another caricatured French palace or ridiculous Gothic castle, which other railroad or steel barons built in abundance. He required something entirely different. An architectural statement that would demonstrate unquestionable intellectual and aesthetic superiority over the Eastern establishment. The house was to scream not about the amount of money spent, but about the quality of thought of its owner. Thus, industrial money, earned on the heavy, blood-worn physical labor of millions of laundresses, began its astonishing path to transformation into high art. You stand above time and observe this astonishing, ironic transition. The deaf noise of Ohio's steam conveyors slowly fades in Gamble's mind, giving way to the ringing silence of drafting offices, where any moment the pragmatic monopolist and the fanatical artist will meet. David set off to the very edge of the continent, to sun-drenched California, escaping from the soot-blackened skies of his homeland. He brought with him inexhaustible means and burning ambition to leave behind a mark that no water could ever wash away. And it was precisely there that he was to meet those capable of translating the dry language of accounting books into the timeless language of architectural eternity. The history of great architecture is almost always the history of a complex, sometimes painful clash of two polar psychotypes. It is the meeting of the pragmatic client, wishing to fix his greatness in space, and the obsessed creator, who uses others' millions as a tool to realize his own utopias. In 1907, strolling along the sunlit streets of the respectable city of Pasadena, David Barry Gamble makes a fateful choice. He refuses the services of fashionable New York studios, stamping out pompous mansions for industrial barons, and turns his gaze to two brothers, Henry and Charles Green. This decision became that very turning point when cold industrial power met fanatical devotion to hand labor. The Green brothers were not just builders. They were fervent adepts of the arts and crafts movement, a philosophy that deeply despised mass production, factory aesthetics, and the soulless symmetry of the machine age. Appreciate the full depth of this historical irony. David Gamble, whose incredible, astronomically measured fortune was entirely sustained by standardization, conveyors, and non-stop mass production of identical bars of soap, hires architects who hate everything mechanical. He pays them with that very conveyor money so that they create for him an absolutely unique, completely anti-industrial space in which there will not be a single stamped detail. This merger of the monopolist's pragmatism and artistic obsession led to the creation of a masterpiece where every door hinge became a manifesto against the very system that paid for its creation. The choice of location for construction was not a random whim of a bored millionaire. Pasadena in the early 20th century became a true mecca for the weary, suffocating elite of the East Coast and Midwest. This city was called the Valley of Health. The Gambles fled here not just from harsh winters. They fled from the aggressive, suffocating factory smog of Cincinnati, that very black smoke which they themselves daily released into the sky from the chimneys of their own enterprises. The deep paradox lay in the fact that, selling America cleanliness, they themselves were choking on the dirty side effects of their production. The California plot of land, located in the quiet and exclusive Westmoreland Place neighborhood, was to become their personal, closed-off from the world sanatorium, where the air was as clean as the reputation of their brand. The plot was chosen so that the house would organically blend with the surrounding landscape, drowning in the greenery of eucalyptus and spreading oaks. This was not an act of ostentatious humility, but a subtle calculation. They wanted to hide the colossal fortune behind a screen of natural harmony, thereby demonstrating that they were above vulgar displays of power through marble facades and heavy porticos. Gamble wanted to show the arrogant aristocrats of the East Coast that his family did not need pseudo-European palaces to feel their superiority. The style chosen by the Green brothers became a deep psychoanalytical response to the family's hidden complexes. Arts and crafts architecture, with its massive wooden beams, wide overhanging roofs, and Japanese motifs, conveyed fundamentality, solidity, and deep connection with nature. This was a style that artificially created a sense of antiquity and centuries-old rootedness. For new money, smelling of fresh animal fat, it was critically important to acquire a residence that looked as though it had always stood on this land, as though it had grown from the soil and not been bought with yesterday's profits from selling cleaning products. The architects received full carte blanche and an incredible budget exceeding $50,000, a sum on which in those days one could build an entire city block. The Green brothers designed absolutely everything, from the shape of the roof to the pattern of weaving on the carpets and the curve of spoons in the dining room. They fanatically selected every piece of wood, rejecting hundreds of boards due to the slightest imperfection in texture. You stand above time and see how on the construction site unfolds a real war for authenticity. In a world where Gamble factories produced hundreds of bars of soap per minute, here, under the California sun, carpenters spent weeks to manually, without a single nail, assemble complex wooden joints. This was redemption through craft, an attempt by the monopolist to wash away the sin of mass production by buying himself absolute, unattainable uniqueness in wood and stone. Ahead of us awaits a full tour of this wooden labyrinth, where every interior detail hides its deep secret. Come closer. Leave behind the California heat and the noisy world in which everything is sold and bought. We enter the Gamble house not as idle tourists, but as psychologists, dissecting the architectural mind of its owners. This is not a tour of square footage and cost. This is immersion into a complex, meticulously constructed mental labyrinth, where every inch of space serves one purpose: elevation and simultaneous isolation of those who own it. Crossing the threshold, you immediately encounter the main masterpiece and semantic center of the house, the gigantic entrance stained glass, known as the Tree of Life. 3 massive panels of multi-layered iridescent glass in leaded framing depict a spreading oak, whose roots go deep into the soil, and branches reach toward an abstract sky. The light passing through this stained glass does not just illuminate the hall. It passes through a complex system of color filtration, painting the entrance area in dense, honeyed, almost sacred tones. The Tree of Life is not just a decorative element. It is a loud, visual manifesto of the dynasty, a metaphor for deep roots, which the first generation of soap makers so lacked, now literally carved into the facade, artificially creating the illusion of antiquity and unshakability of the lineage. The space of the house unfolds progressively, like a complex musical symphony. From the overwhelming scale of wide terraces, you slowly transition to enveloping, almost frightening intimacy of the inner chambers. Feel this sensory contrast of the highest level. Outside, bright California sun, and here, inside, reigns eternal, artificially created twilight. The air is thick and heavy. You feel the sweetish, deep smell of expensive wood, the subtle aroma of beeswax with which the panels were hand-polished, and the faint smell of old tapestries. Every room here screams of fanatical attention to detail. The Green brothers used 17 rarest types of wood brought from all over the world: white cedar, dark Burmese teak, Honduran mahogany, light maple, and black walnut. They did not just combine species, they made them enter into a complex visual dialogue. The wood is polished to such a degree that it seems liquid, reflecting the dim light of exclusive lamps. In this perfect space, there is not a single straight line. Every corner is smoothed, every edge rounded by human hands. In the world where Gamble's machines cut strict rectangular bars of soap, here there should be nothing mechanical, nothing sharp. This is architecture that denies the very world that paid for its existence. The echo of steps in the spacious hall suddenly breaks off as soon as you step onto the thick carpets of the main living room. Here is the heart of the house, a massive fireplace made of green faience. But let's be honest. In the warm climate of Pasadena, a fireplace of such scale was never needed to heat the room. Every fireplace here was designed by the Green brothers to warm not the body, but the pride of the owners. It served as an altar around which the family gathered to feel their indisputable superiority over the hustle of the outside world. Architectural psychoanalysis of this house reveals another dark side of elite life. Notice the corridor system. The house is designed so that the paths of movement for owners and servants almost never intersect. Service staircases are narrow, unobtrusive, and hidden behind heavy doors, blending with the wooden wall panels. Kitchen and pantries are separated by a complex system of airlocks. Corridors created so that the staff remained invisible. This is a perfect metaphor for their business. The Gambles sold cleanliness to millions of ordinary workers, but in their own perfect world, they did not wish to see those who service this world. Dirt, sweat, and rough labor were to remain off-screen, ensuring the uninterrupted illusion of self-functioning of this wooden palace. You stand in the middle of the dark library, surrounded by books whose bindings perfectly match the color of the wooden shelves, and feel how this house begins to press on you. This obsessive, manic perfection, this total control over every door handle and every refraction of light, begins to evoke a slight feeling of claustrophobia. External grandeur has been achieved, but what happens inside when the doors close and the family remains alone with its perfect creation? The house, conceived as a triumphant refuge, gradually begins to dictate its own rules. Perfection always contains within itself a slow-acting poison. The Gamble house, conceived as an absolute aesthetic triumph, as a perfect wooden shell for protection from the imperfect world, gradually began to reveal its hidden architectural aggression. When external grandeur is achieved, when every wooden joint is polished to a mirror shine, and all enemies and envious people are left far behind on the damp East Coast, the invisible internal corrosion begins. The golden cage slammed shut from the inside. David Gamble and his wife Mary built this mansion, escaping from factory smog and hustle. But they overlooked one cruel law of human psychology. Space, created for total isolation, ultimately begins to devour those isolated within it. The house demanded colossal, almost absurd efforts to maintain its sterile cleanliness and impeccable appearance. An army of servants had to daily rub the rare wood with special compounds, clean complex carpet patterns, and uphold the illusion that time had stopped here. The owners found themselves hostages to their own masterpiece. The conflict of the golden cage became inevitable. The house, conceived as a monument to their personal triumph, slowly turned into a luxurious mausoleum for the living. In these endless, dimly lit suites of rooms, where every piece of furniture was a work of art, there was no room for simple human carelessness. Here, one could not casually toss a book on the table without disrupting the perfect composition conceived by the architects. Here, one could not laugh loudly without destroying the oppressive silence absorbed by heavy tapestries. Life in this mansion turned into an endless ceremonial, into service to the house itself. The personal drama of the Gamble family within these walls lay in the constant, paranoid anxiety for their health, which had brought them to Pasadena. They built 3 huge sleeping porches on the 2nd floor, believing that sleeping in the open air would protect them from diseases. Every night, they literally went out to sleep on the street, wrapping themselves in heavy blankets, paradoxically fleeing from their luxurious bedrooms finished in redwood. The irony of the situation is stunning. People who spent a fortune on building the most beautiful interior in America preferred to sleep outside its bounds, fearing stagnant air inside. Disease and fear of death still penetrated through the stained glass and thick walls, proving that no millions can buy biological safety. Here we approach the deep moral layer of our story. Ask yourself the question, standing in the midst of this frozen-in-wood silence, does a person even have the moral right to such elaborate, screaming luxury, created on the pennies of the hard labor of millions of other people? Did the Gambles become happier, having walled themselves off from the bustling world with a dense ring of eucalyptus and perfect wooden panels? They sold soap so that people could wash away the sweat of hard labor from themselves, but they themselves tried to wash away any connection with this world, hiding in a man-made utopia. Should we envy these people wandering in the twilight of their impeccable corridors, or pity their desperate attempt to hide from the inevitability of aging and withering? In their pursuit of absolute beauty, there was something deeply tragic. They created a space so perfect that it was hard to simply live in it. This loneliness at the top of the financial pyramid was exacerbated by the realization that the world beyond the mansion walls was inexorably changing. The era of great industrial barons and unlimited budgets was approaching its sunset. David Gamble died in 1923, never managing to cheat time with the help of salubrious California air. Mary Gamble outlived him by not long, and the house, deprived of its main priests, remained standing in anticipation of coming storms. Ahead lay the 20th century with its wars, economic crashes, and complete destruction of the old way of life. The perfect wooden palace was to face the most terrible test: time, which spares neither cheap soap nor Honduran mahogany. Any architectural masterpiece is always an attempt to cheat time. But time, as is known, does not forgive deception, and sooner or later presents its bill. The Gamble house faced this crisis not in the form of a sudden fire or earthquake, but in the form of slow, inexorable change of the era itself. The Great Depression, which thundered in 1929, and then World War II irretrievably destroyed that world in which the creation and maintenance of such mansions was even possible. The house faced time in its harshest form. How the meaning of this exclusive masterpiece changes when the era of huge staffs of servants and endless, unhurried winter seasons passes. The Gamble family, though retaining a significant part of their soap fortune, could no longer, nor wanted to, maintain this level of extravagance. The heirs, representing already another generation with entirely different values, faced a difficult dilemma. Maintaining the wooden palace in Pasadena became a financial and moral burden. Tens of thousands of dollars were required just to prevent the rare wood from drying out, and to keep in working condition the most complex engineering systems conceived by the Green brothers. The golden cage became too heavy. What for David Gamble was a symbol of absolute status and a triumph of personal taste, for his children and grandchildren turned into a museum exhibit in which it was impossible to live a modern life. In post-war America, aspiring to minimalism, glass and concrete, the dark wooden suites and heavy furniture in the arts and crafts style seemed hopelessly outdated, gloomy and oppressive. The house slowly sank into a lethargic sleep. Its halls emptied, and the polish on the panels dulled without the daily care of an army of servants. The moment of inevitable transformation of purpose arrives. The egoism of the creators, who wanted to build a perfect refuge only for themselves, collides with the necessity to pass this vanity into others' hands, to somehow save it from physical destruction. In 1946, the house briefly passes into the ownership of Cecil Bauman, who, fortunately, does not dare to make destructive changes to it. But the real turning point happens later, when the Gamble family realizes the historical value of this object. In 1966, the dynasty's heirs make a historic decision. They transfer the house, along with all the original furniture, to the city of Pasadena for joint management with the University of Southern California. In this act of transfer lies the deepest irony and philosophical lesson. Stone and wood last longer than man, but even the strongest wood requires that someone remember the name of its creator and pay for its preservation. The Great Soap Dynasty, which amassed capital on the mass consumer, ultimately was forced to return its most exclusive, closed masterpiece back to society. The mansion, built as a fortress from prying eyes, opened its doors to those very ordinary people whose ancestors might have once bought cheap ivory soap. The vanity of the super-rich always has one vulnerable point. They can buy the best architects, bring the rarest wood from Burma, and make masters carve perfect patterns. But they cannot buy themselves eternity without the help of those from whom they so diligently walled themselves off. The Gamble house survived not because it was well built. It survived because society agreed to recognize its value and take on the costs of its maintenance. You stand above time and see how the status of this place changes. From a secret refuge of the monopolist, it turns into public property, into an architectural laboratory for students and tourists. The illusion of absolute independence from the world collapsed, and it turned out that saving this masterpiece depends not on millions in bank accounts, but on grants, donations, and the work of restorers. Every great house ultimately becomes a mirror, in which is reflected not only the face of its creator, but also the face of the entire era. The Gamble House in Pasadena today is not just a museum of arts and crafts architectural style. It is frozen in wood manifesto on the nature of wealth, fear, and human ego. Walking through its perfectly polished halls today, inhaling the smell of old cedar, we feel the presence of ghosts, of people who tried to buy themselves immortality by fleeing from the world to the edge of the continent. Let us tie together the beginning and end of this paradoxical story. Let us return to that very metaphor of soap and cleanliness with which we began our immersion into the secrets of this dynasty. Recall the boiling vats of animal fat in Cincinnati, the acrid smoke of factory chimneys, and millions of identical white bars that promised America deliverance from dirt. All those billions of soap bars that brought the family colossal, unimaginable fortune have long been washed into the sewer of history. They dissolved in water, turned into dirty foam, and disappeared without a trace, having fulfilled their momentary, everyday function. The huge fortunes amassed on this soapy foam were distributed, spent, eaten by taxes and inflation of subsequent decades. But this house is the only thing that did not dissolve. It stands here, under the California sun, as stubborn proof that from the cheapest, mass industry can grow something absolutely unique and timeless. Industrial dirt and penny product paid for the creation of the purest, impeccable architectural symphony. In this lies the great irony and highest justice of capitalism. The nature of the human footprint on Earth is always dual. What do we leave after ourselves? The Procter & Gamble dynasty left behind a global corporation, which to this day produces mass consumer goods. But corporations are faceless. They exist in the form of charts, stocks, and advertising budgets. And David Barry Gamble left behind something tangible. He left behind a space in which materialized his fear of death, his complex before old money, and his desperate thirst for authenticity. This house is his personal confession, carved in Honduran mahogany. Does it matter that this masterpiece was paid for by the hard labor of workers at Ohio factories? Today, 100 years later, these moral questions fade into the background in the face of pure aesthetics. Time has an amazing ability to erase ethical stains from works of art, leaving only admiration for the mastery of the creators. The Green brothers, brilliant architects who hated the machine age, used the money of the machine monopoly to create a monument to hand labor. They defeated time by making industrial millions serve high art. You stand before the main facade, watching how light refracts in the stained glass of the Tree of Life. The house no longer belongs to the family. The golden cage is open. Hundreds of tourists daily pass through these corridors, breaking that very perfect silence for which all this was created. And there is a peculiar historical catharsis in this. The refuge, built for isolation, became the property of all. Empires are built on blood, steel, and dirt. They try to wash themselves clean by building perfect palaces and hiding behind high fences. But the truth is that no house can become absolute protection from the world that paid for it. In the end, all that remains from huge fortunes and great ambitions is only polished wood, storing in its fibers the memory of those who feared to disappear without a trace. Perhaps, the greatest illusion of the rich is not that money can buy immortality. Their greatest illusion is that by washing the hands of the dirt of this world, one can cease to be part of it.